Thank you everyone for coming out today. As all of us here today know, what has happened in Wisconsin over the last weeks and years is not representative of the Wisconsin values that we stand for: responsibility, fairness, and opportunity for all. Scott Walker has enacted some of the most egregious legislative record of any governor in the United States, hurting our middle class and our working families. Just this week, Scott Walker tried to rip apart our higher education system, the University of Wisconsin, which is one of the most respected schools in the world. He's expected to sign into law a radical abortion measure that takes away a woman's ability to make decisions about her health care with her family, her faith, and under her doctor's guidance. And Scott Walker continues to completely disregard Wisconsin workers, encouraging unfair tax breaks that benefit a select few while driving down middle-class wages that so many families here in Wisconsin depend upon. As a matter of fact, Wisconsin has seen the largest shrinkage of middle-class income in the nation. Yet here he is today, announcing his candidacy for presidency of the United States. For months now, Scott Walker has been preparing for this moment and campaigning all over the world instead of doing his job here in Wisconsin. But what has been completely unacceptable is that he's been putting his own interest and the interest of a select few millionaires and billionaires ahead of what is best for Wisconsinites. Our governor puts politics above people and simply has the wrong priorities. He's had disastrous budgets and an economy that is lagging behind the Midwest and the nation, and a record of ethics problems. People are suffering because of Walker's actions, and we've had enough of his reign here in Wisconsin. And we want Americans to know just how disastrous he would be as a president. Representative Mandela Barnes has been seen firsthand just how bad Walker has been for Wisconsin, and he wants to share his experience on the terrible choices that Walker has made here in Wisconsin.
Thank you, Martha. I have firsthand experience in legislating with Governor Scott Walker, and let me say that Governor Scott Walker does not care about working people. He does not care about our state's future. Scott Walker cares simply about Scott Walker. I think it's fair to say that everything the American people need to know about Governor Walker has been demonstrated in Madison over the past week. Scott Walker's plan for workers: work harder and make less money. He ended wage protections for workers by repealing the prevailing wage, therefore setting no minimum salary for construction workers on local projects. This will drive down wages for working people all over the state. He threatened the right to a weekend for factory and retail workers all across Wisconsin, and he nixed all living wage references in his budget and replaced it with a minimum wage, undermining what it means to make an honest, livable wage that can support a family in our state. This came after Walker said that the minimum wage doesn't even serve a purpose. Governor Walker is expected to sign a 20-week abortion ban that has no exceptions for rape, incest, or even the health of the mother. He slashed $250 million in funding for the University of Wisconsin system, weakening our world-class higher education system and putting the dream of college out of reach for thousands of middle-class Wisconsinites. And lastly, he attempted to strangle access to records, a provision that would have ensured that some of Governor Walker's most shady dealings would never see the light of day. So there you have it. If you value your paycheck, if you value your weekend, your education system, your right to know, or your right to make your own health care decisions without politicians getting in the way, Governor Scott Walker is not your candidate. And with a record of ethics problems and a disastrous budget like this one, his priorities simply stand against the livelihood of all working Americans. Walker says he wants to bring Wisconsin to Washington, but the fact that he's already brought the divisiveness of Washington to Wisconsin, with that, I would like to turn over the floor to former mayor of Minneapolis and the vice chair of the Democratic Party, Mayor R.T. Rybak. Mayor Rybak.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mandela. Good to see you. We were campaigning before here a couple years ago, and it's good to be back. As your neighbor, I can admit that I am envious of a few things about Wisconsin. The winning record of the Packers and the Badgers, Wisconsin Dells, New Glarus beer, to name a few. But I am not envious of your governor. In fact, his economic record compared to Minnesota's is proof that Scott Walker is not only wrong for Wisconsin, but he would be real wrong for the United States of America. So let's dial the camera back here a few years ago and remember when Scott Walker came in, and I'll give you the view from across the border. So what Scott Walker did when he came in is he promised all of you in Wisconsin he would create 250,000 new jobs. Elect him because he could create 250,000 new jobs. Remember that number. And so then he came about with a series of incredibly divisive actions here in Wisconsin that split this state apart, but said this pain is necessary to create those 250,000 jobs that Scott Walker promised. In Minnesota, what he did is he went right to the border and put a big sign saying Wisconsin is open for business, and then promoted all over Minnesota, come to Wisconsin with your business, Minnesota, and we'll give you state-supported tax incentives to come here. Well, how did that work out? Well, I can tell you how it worked out because at the same time that was happening in Wisconsin, we took a whole other strategy in Minnesota because we'd sort of seen this movie before under our former governor, Tim Pawlenty, who tried many of the same tactics unsuccessfully when he was governor. Mark Dayton, Democrat, and the legislature, controlled then by Democrats, took over at the same time as Scott Walker, and these two states that have had almost the same economic record for decades went in radically different directions. In Minnesota, what happened is that we raised the minimum wage, we raised taxes on the very wealthiest Minnesotans so that we could invest in things like schools and roads and health care and to balance the state's budget. All of that was in sharp contrast to what Scott Walker did in this state, and the record is absolutely clear. For the first time in our joint history together, as these two Midwest twins, Minnesota and Wisconsin's economies went in the opposite direction. Wisconsin, economically, is now one of the slowest performing economic states in the United States of America. Minnesota is near the top. We just last month were named the most business-friendly state in the United States and are in the top of almost every category in job creation. Minneapolis-St. Paul has the lowest unemployment rate of any metropolitan area in the country. When you stop and look at the economic record of Scott Walker, he did not create those 250,000 jobs. He did not attract businesses from a state with a very different philosophy just across the river, and he absolutely has not been able to unite this state in a vision for the future. Now, you just saw a debate in Wisconsin at your legislature, and the debate was really about whether to cut deeply into the university system, deeply into your aid for cities and schools, or many of the other tough choices you had because Scott Walker couldn't balance the state's budget and because the economy is stagnant. We had a debate about the budget in Minnesota. It was about which early childhood strategy to invest in, all-day kindergarten or targeted scholarships for pre-K for kids most in need. The situation here is dramatically different. But we also were able to do that in Minnesota by doing something Scott Walker could never do. We kept our state united. I've been to Wisconsin a lot over these last few years. Any Minnesotan with their head screwed on straight comes over here to visit all the great things about Wisconsin. But when you cross that border, you can't avoid the fact that this has been a state that has been in one of the, if not the most divisive periods in the history of Wisconsin. And I suppose if a restaurant had about half the customers saying they got a good meal and about half saying they got food poisoning, I guess they could call them a success. But politically, that is not the way to run a state. If you really look at what Scott Walker did, he took this state that over the entire course since settlement has worked together. People came into Wisconsin in some of the most difficult, harsh terrain in the United States of America, and they put up the barns together, they built the small towns together, they built the economy together, and for the first time, they became one of the most divided states in the country. In Minnesota, we have plenty of fights, no doubt about it, but the fact of the matter is we're moving in the right direction. Now, do you really think that we need somebody to go to Washington to figure out how to make Washington get in a bigger fight than it's already in today? That's the one thing Scott Walker has proven. But let me finish with one other point. You've seen Scott Walker's videos. You've seen them all about the tough stand he took when the state was divided and people were marching on the Capitol. He sounds like a really tough, straight-looking guy, right? The point Scott Walker always makes is, you won't agree with me, but I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you the truth. Well, that is absolutely one of the most laughable points, because right now Scott Walker is saying one thing to the people of Wisconsin and going down to Iowa and saying the exact opposite. I remember being over here right after Minnesota passed marriage equity, and we were saying, hey, if you guys can't get married over in Wisconsin, if you don't have equal rights, come across the border. We'll give them to you. We'll take all your money for your weddings. Scott Walker stood up and said, no, no, no. The fight for marriage equity is over. That's fine. Now he's going down to Wisconsin, or down to Iowa, and telling everybody in Iowa that he supports a national amendment to allow states to make their own decision on marriage equity. He's done the same with immigration reform. He's done the same with abortion rights. And this quote-unquote straight-talking Scott Walker is saying one thing in Wisconsin and another thing in Iowa, and people in this part of the country understand a weather vane, but Scott Walker is making my neck hurt. The fact of the matter is, the straight-talking Scott Walker, who wraps himself in fights that have really ripped this state apart, is not what this country needs. Thank you.
The governor is likely to run on this position that he's won 3 elections in Wisconsin.
Yep.
If he is so disastrous, how has he won the state 3 times?
Well, first off, I think one of the things that's most important is we're not now deciding whether to elect Scott Walker governor of Wisconsin or not. We're trying to decide whether this is the person who can lead the United States of America. Scott Walker's won 2 elections, and I give him credit for that. He won a 3rd in a recount, where a lot of people, frankly, don't support recounts. I was over here. I saw how that worked. But the fact of the matter is, we're now debating the long-term record of Scott Walker. He made a lot of promises to get elected a first time. Those were broken. He made a lot of promises the second time. People were skeptical. But the people of Wisconsin and the people of the United States of America are not going to ignore a record that is proven to be false.
What kind of a foe does he represent to Democrats when compared with this more than dozen other Republican candidates?
Yeah. Well, you know, there are a lot of Republican candidates running for president, but the 2 front runners, Scott Walker and Donald Trump, have surged to the top of the pack by saying the most extreme things they could possibly say. Scott Walker and Donald Trump, I think, believe that what you should do is to make a right-wing commitment in Iowa and then somehow pretend the people of the United States of America don't believe what you said the first time around. I think Scott Walker, frankly, is trying to borrow Mitt Romney's Pinocchio suit. The fact of the matter is you can't say one thing in one place and one in another. So Scott Walker is, on paper, a candidate who looks credible, just like Tim Pawlenty did 4 years ago. Midwestern governor who supposedly had some success, and the fact of the matter is, once people begin to pick apart that record, it falls apart. And I'm a person who is a pretty positive, happy guy, but I'm more than comfortable being able to say to somebody who's criticized every single thing a Democratic president, Democratic leaders have done since trying to get this country back in the right direction. I'm more than comfortable contrasting his record with the record of success just across the Little River.
RT, in some ways, is Scott Walker, sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to do it.
Is he a scarier candidate, though, for Democrats in the fact that he could go farther in this race than Tim Pawlenty did 4 years ago, and certainly a lot farther than Michelle Bachmann went?
We're from Minnesota, so yeah. That he could go further? Sure. I think the Republican field has many different candidates with many different directions. But right now, all eyes are on the front runners, Scott Walker and Donald Trump. And there are many others in the field, and we'll see. I think they all are different flavors of the same pudding that has been very much about trying to divide the country in Wisconsin and in a pretty extreme Congress. I could do a horse race analysis of who's up or who's down. Right now, Walker and Trump are up, and I attribute that to them saying the most extreme things in the field. I think the fact of the matter is you have to win an election, and the Democrats have a few good candidates who are ready to win it.
How does the National Party see this, where you have so many Republicans in the race, and today not nearly as many Democrats?
Yeah. Well, there have been times, and there have been Democratic fields that are crowded too. I think, frankly, as somebody who went through, 8 years ago, a cycle where we had 2 and really several incredibly great candidates, that's fun, but it's a whole lot more fun to be pretty united and watch the other side rip itself apart. That's, I guess, fine with me. I think the thing. Well, I think there are definite differences of opinion within the Democratic Party, and hey, we're Democrats. We love that. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, we will have absolutely no problem uniting, be it Scott Walker or Donald Trump.
This is a question from Martha. Martha, do Democrats see the fact that Scott Walker doesn't have a college degree as an issue?
I think Democrats are looking at what's happened in the state and just wanting to center on his actions. His background is not the issue, it's what he's actually done. So the fact that our economy is floundering, our budget's larger than it's ever been, our debt's higher than it's ever been, all these things he promised to take care of, he hasn't taken care of. You know, his WEDC, his job agency, has just fallen in disgrace. So I think we're centering our efforts on looking at what has actually happened, because that's what's going to turn things around for us here in the state, and that's what's going to make America see that they do not want Scott Walker as their next president.
Could I add something real quickly on that, because this is a really important point. Scott Walker's degree has absolutely no role whatsoever in the campaign, but his role in preventing thousands of Wisconsinites of the future from getting the degree they deserve is absolutely central to this race. The Wisconsin education system has been the envy of the world. And there are Minnesotans who've come here, and there are Wisconsinites who've grown out of this and created incredible businesses and economic growth. Scott Walker not only has not created jobs here, but he is cutting off the economic engine that has fueled this brain power state for generations. We will spend a lot of time talking about the degrees Scott Walker is preventing kids from getting, because he's letting student loans go up, he's cutting aid to the university system, and he's also eviscerating the education system in K-12 that really has been a feeder for really the world's economic system. We can't wait to talk about Scott Walker's lack of record on education.
If I might ask something perhaps somewhat similar. Governor Walker has said that broadly, governors make the best presidents. Do you agree?
Well, I guess I'd say mayors make the best. That's a whole other thing. This is an executive position, and I think the country would love someone with an executive record of success. They'll have to look past Scott Walker to find that.
One more question.
Martha, the governor in the most recent Marquette poll had an approval rate of 41%. How frustrating is that then for the state Democrats to see that and then know that you were unable to remove him from office twice?
Well, I think the reason that he has plummeted is because he made a lot of promises to the people here in Wisconsin, and he hasn't made good on those promises. And one of the ones that was most frustrating to me is last year, just before the election, he was promising that our upcoming budget would have a $500 million surplus. And then just weeks after the election was over, he announced it was a $2.2 billion deficit. That's the kind of flip-flop that everybody in America needs to be aware of. You can't trust what Scott Walker tells you. And now here in America, in Wisconsin, we know that. And that's why I believe his approval rating has dropped so much, is because people have seen that he's not trustworthy.
How about his constant comparing himself to Ronald Reagan and the nostalgia for the Reagan era? How are the Democrats going to combat that?
Well, Scott Walker can compare himself to Ronald Reagan's record of creating deficits. That is one comparison I give him.
All right, everyone, thanks so much.